had served as a park ranger for over 30 years. The woods had always been my sanctuary, a place where I found peace among the towering trees and the quiet rustle of leaves. Tonight was supposed to be my last shift before retirement. My colleagues threw a little party at the station earlier in the day with cake and coffee, and they joked about how I'd finally get to spend time in the woods without having to worry about lost hikers or mischievous campers. But as I started my final patrol, I couldn't shake off a strange feeling. Maybe it was the way the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever. Or perhaps it was the way the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a chill that wasn't there earlier. Whatever it was, something felt off. The forest was my friend, my home. I knew every trail, every rock, every sound that echoed through the dense woods. But tonight, those familiar sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush, were absent. Instead, there was only silence, deep and unsettling. I tried to push the feeling aside. After all, it was just another patrol. I'd done this countless times before. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling only grew stronger, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The first sign that something was wrong came when I found the deer. It was lying in a small clearing, its body torn open as if by some wild animal. But this was different. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. And the way its eyes stared blankly up at the sky, wide with terror, sent a shiver down my spine. I knelt beside the deer, examining the wounds more closely. The edges were clean, almost surgical, but there were no tracks around the body, no sign of a struggle. It was as if something had swooped down from above, done its work, and disappeared without a trace. Standing up, I felt a sense of unease that I hadn't felt in years. I was no stranger to death in the woods. Predators hunted and prey was killed. It was the cycle of life. But this was something else. I decided to radio back to the station, but the static on the other end was deafening. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't get through. It was as if something was blocking the signal. As I stood there trying to make sense of the situation, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My hand instinctively went to my flashlight, and I shone it in the direction of the sound. But there was nothing there, just the dark, empty woods staring back at me. I remembered an old legend that the locals used to tell, stories passed down from generation to generation about a creature that haunted these woods. Some said it was a spirit, others claimed it was a demon. But the most common version of the story was that it was an ancient creature, older than the trees themselves, that had been hunting in these woods for centuries. I had always dismissed these stories as just that, stories, but standing there with the lifeless deer at my feet and the growing sense of dread in my gut, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to them. The legend spoke of a creature that could blend into the shadows, moving silently through the forest, unseen by all but its prey. It was said to hunt not for food, but for sport, taking pleasure in the fear it instilled in those it stalked. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. It was just a story, nothing more. But as I continued my patrol, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. The night grew darker, and the silence grew heavier, pressing down on me like a weight. I was deep in the woods now, far from the safety of the station. The trees loomed above me, their branches twisting and gnarled, casting strange shadows that danced in the beam of my flashlight. I was just about to turn back when I heard it, a low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the darkness ahead. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl was followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush, the snapping of twigs and the rustling of leaves. Slowly, I raised my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the sound. My hand trembled as I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the shadows. They were a sickly yellow, and they seemed to burn with an unnatural light. The creature stepped into the beam of the flashlight, and I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, tall and slender, with long limbs that ended in sharp claws. Its skin was dark, almost black, and it seemed to shimmer in the light, as if it were made of shadows. Its face was twisted, almost human, but not quite, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and I could feel its gaze boring into me, studying me. Then, without warning, it lunged. I barely had time to react. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears as I crashed through the underbrush. The creature was right behind me, its footsteps heavy and fast, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, and I knew that if I slowed down even for a second, it would be the end of me. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning as I sprinted through the woods, dodging trees and leaping over roots. The creature let out a howl, a sound that echoed through the forest, sending a chill down my spine. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated hunger. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my lungs burning, my vision blurred with sweat. I could hear the creature getting closer, its growls growing louder, more feral. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw at the old ranger's cabin. It was small and dilapidated, but it was my only chance. I made a final, desperate sprint for the door, slamming it shut behind me just as the creature crashed into it. I locked the door and backed away, my hands shaking. The creature was outside, scratching at the wood, its growls low and menacing. The walls of the cabin shook as it threw itself against them, trying to break through. I knew the door wouldn't hold for long. I looked around the cabin, searching for anything that I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall. It was dusty, and I had no idea if it still worked, but it was my only option. I grabbed the rifle and checked the chamber. There were a few rounds left, just enough for one last stand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I had faced wild animals before, but this was different. This was something else, something far more dangerous. The creature slammed against the door again, and I could hear the wood splintering. I raised the rifle, aiming it at the door, and waited. The door burst open, and the creature lunged at me. I fired, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the cabin. The creature let out a howl of pain, but it didn't stop. It came at me again, and I fired another shot. The creature staggered, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. It was hurt, but it wasn't dead. I could see the hatred in its eyes, the burning desire to kill. It lunged again, and I fired one last shot. The bullet struck it in the chest, and the creature let out a final, ear-piercing scream before collapsing to the ground. I stood there panting, the rifle still raised, waiting for it to move. But it didn't. It just lay there, motionless. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the creature's lifeless body. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I had faced death before, but nothing like this. I had come face to face with something out of a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist. I lowered the rifle and took a step back. The cabin was silent now, the only sound the ragged breath escaping my lungs. I was alive. I had survived. But as I looked down at the creature, a cold realization washed over me. This wasn't the end. I knew the legends, the stories, the creature wasn't alone. There were more of them out there in the woods, hunting, waiting, and I had just killed one of them. I left the cabin at first light, the creature's body still lying on the floor. I didn't know what to do with it, so I left it there, figuring that someone would come and deal with it later. All I wanted was to get out of the woods, to leave behind the nightmare I had just lived through. As I walked back to the station, the forest seemed different, darker, more menacing. The shadows were longer, the silence more oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was following me. But every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just the tree standing tall and silent. When I finally reached the station, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had made it. I was safe. My colleagues were there. And when they saw me, they rushed over, asking if I was okay. I must have looked terrible, covered in dirt and sweat, with a wild look in my eyes. I didn't know how to explain what had happened, so I just told them I had encountered a wild animal, that it had attacked me, and I had been forced to defend myself. They seemed to accept the explanation, though I could see the doubt in their eyes. But as I sat there trying to catch my breath, I couldn't stop thinking about the creature, about the way it had looked at me with those glowing eyes, the way it had hunted me through the woods. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. I retired the next day. There was a small ceremony at the station with handshakes and well wishes, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the creature, about the legends, about what else might be lurking out there in the woods. I tried to move on, to leave it all behind. I spent time with my family, took up hobbies, tried to enjoy my retirement. But the memories of that night haunted me. I couldn't sleep without seeing those glowing eyes in the darkness, without hearing the creature's growls echoing in my ears. And then one night the nightmare stopped. But it wasn't a relief. No, it was something far worse. Because I realized that the creature was no longer just a memory, it was real. And it was coming for me. I started hearing things, strange noises outside my house at night. The sound of something scratching at the walls, the distant growl of a creature that I knew too well. My family didn't hear it, but I did. I knew it was out there, watching, waiting. I tried to warn them, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was just stressed, that I needed to relax, to let go of the past. But I knew the truth. I had killed one of the creatures, and now the others were coming for me. It was a stormy night when they finally came. The wind howled outside, and the rain lashed against the windows. I had been expecting it, waiting for it, but that didn't make it any easier. I sat in the living room, the lights dim, a shotgun in my hands. My family was asleep upstairs, unaware of the danger that was closing in. I could hear the creatures moving outside, their growls low and menacing, their footsteps heavy as they circled the house. I knew I couldn't protect them, not from this. But I had to try. I had to keep them safe, no matter what. The first creature crashed through the front door, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its claws sharp and deadly. I fired the shotgun, the blast echoing through the house. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It let out a roar of anger and pain and lunged at me. I fired again, and this time the creature went down. But there were more of them, too many to count. They swarmed into the house, their eyes glowing, their growls filling the air. I fought as hard as I could, firing shot after shot, but it was no use. There were too many of them. They overwhelmed me, their claws tearing into my flesh, their growls deafening. But even as they tore me apart, I didn't scream, I didn't beg for mercy. I knew this was my fate, the price I had to pay for killing one of them. And in my final moments, as the darkness closed in, I felt a strange sense of peace. Because I knew that my family would be safe. The creatures had come for me, and they wouldn't stop until they had taken their revenge. But once I was gone, they would leave, satisfied that justice had been served. They found my body the next morning, torn and bloody, surrounded by the shattered remains of the creatures. My family was safe, just as I had hoped, but they would never understand what had really happened, what I had sacrificed to protect them. The authorities ruled it an animal attack, a tragic accident. But those who knew me, who had heard the old legends, whispered that it was something more, something darker. The woods are quiet now, but the legend lives on. The story of the park ranger who encountered a creature that had been hunting in the woods for centuries. A creature that took its revenge in the dead of night, leaving behind nothing but blood and silence. And though I am gone, the woods still stand, ancient and dark, hiding their secrets from the world. And those who venture too deep into the shadows, those who think they can survive the night, should remember the story of the last patrol. Because the creatures are still out there, watching, waiting. And they never forget. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.